Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to continue our constructed set review of Phyrexia All Will Be One with the green cards. Now the way I do constructed set reviews is a little bit different. I don't rate the cards in like some number or letter rating or anything. I think Magic's a little bit more complex than that. But I'm going to go over all of the cards that I think might make any sort of splash in any constructed format. And kind of talk about each one of their like context. So let's do it. Nissa, Ascended Animist, is 3 generic mana, 2 green, and 2 Phyrexian green, leading to a total of 7 or 5 and 4 life. It has completed, which means it enters with 2 less loyalty for each instance of life that you pay with the Phyrexian mana. So if it is paid for with 7 mana, it enters with 7 loyalty. If it's paid for with 6 mana and 2 life, it enters with 5 loyalty. If it's paid with 5 mana and 4 life, it enters with 3 loyalty. +1 is to create an XX green Phyrexian horror creature token, where X is Nissa, Ascended Animist loyalty. -1 is destroy target artifact or enchantment, and -7 is until end of turn to creatures you control get +1/+1 for each force you control and gain lifelink. So this is a really interesting ramp target. I think there are cards that do better things in like Eternal formats, but if an Elves-esque deck, like an Elves-ish rampy and like the Ultimate Matters or whatever deck, like this does a really good like Craterhoof Behemoth impression, I feel like. You know, if like a mono green aggressive, mono green mid-range rampy strategy, I could see playing this card. But you want to like use its ultimate in an overrun. I don't think the other 2 modes on it are quite good enough to play this card as just like a card in a green mid-range deck, especially since in order to play it at a reasonable time frame, for 5 mana, it only starts at 3 loyalty, so you have a 4/4 Phyrexian green horror. You get to do that every turn. That's pretty okay, but I think there are just better targets. However, if you have a rampy Elves-like Overrun Matters deck, I could totally see playing this card like as a kill condition and a fine mid-range card. Tyrannix Rex is 4 generic mana and 3 green Phyrexian dinosaur, 8/8, can't be countered, has trample, ward 4, haste, and toxic 4. This is kind of like is doing a Carnage Tyrant impression, I think. This is a great like ramp target either in the main deck or out of the sideboard just to beat these control and like black mid-range strategies. Green Big Dumb Idiot is just like getting a lot of tools with this set. And this card is going to fulfill the same role that Carnage Tyrant did. Zopandrel Hunger Dominus is 5 generic mana and 2 green Phyrexian horror, 4/6 with reach. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. And you can pay 2 Phyrexian green to sacrifice 2 other creatures to put an indestructible counter on Zopandrel Hunger Dominus. This card's pretty okay. I mean, it needs to be a ramp target. The issue with this card is there are probably better targets. If you untap with this creature and you're able to attack with this creature, or you already have like a board of other big things and you play this creature, it's probably great. Like it probably ends the game, but like a lot needs to go right, and 7 mana is a lot for a card where a lot needs to go right. I could see playing this as like a 1 or 2 of in like a really dedicated ramp strategy in like standard. Otherwise, I don't see it happening. Bloated Contaminator is 2 generic mana, 1 green mana, Phyrexian Beast, 4/4 with trample and toxic 1. And when it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. Now, this is the kind of toxic creature I'm looking for, right? Like, it effectively has toxic 2, because when it deals damage, it puts a poison counter on with toxic and then proliferates, right? And then proliferate, like, in the context of, like, other things that exist, like that Nissa, makes other cards, like, naturally better, right? This will definitely exist in, like, either a Proliferate Matters or just, like, the green poison deck. It's efficiently costed, and it does more than just being bigger than it should be, and we love that for green, like, aggressive strategies, especially poison strategies. Evolved Spinoderm is 2 generic mana, 2 green mana. Phyrexian Beast, 5/5. Enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters. If it has 2 or fewer oil counters, it has trample, otherwise it has hexproof. And at the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from it. And then if it has no oil counters on it, sacrifice it. So 4 mana 5/5, efficiently costed. We love that. It's a 4 mana 5/5 hexproof for at least 2 turns. Like, that's very, very good. And then it has trample afterward. Like, I think this is like a really good card. Like, we can kind of think of this as, again, as 4 mana 5/5 hexproof. Sometimes it keeps hexproof even longer. And if you're casting a 4-mana 5/5 and your deck likes stuff like that, the game's probably over by the time your opponent has the ability to kill it. 3 turns after you played the 4-mana 5/5 with Hexproof. I really like this card. I think it's like a really good, just like big dumb idiot kind of beatdown card. Again, it kind of plays that Carnage Tyrant role, a little bit less good, but for way, way cheaper mana. I like this card in just like a stompy deck. Thrun, Breaker of Silence is 3 generic mana, 2 green mana. It's a 5/5. Spell can't be countered. Has trample. Thrun, Breaker of Silence can't be the target of non-green spells your opponent control or abilities from non-green sources your opponent control. And as long as it's your turn, Thrun has Indestructible. Speaking of control and like really mid-range kind of breakers, Thrun is back and better than ever. The only way to kill it is with a board wipe to speak of. You cast this card, can't be countered, can't be targeted with spot removal, and we're killing you with it. This is going to exist in beatdown strategies, maybe out of the sideboard, like the Carnage Tyrant clone earlier, maybe just in the main deck. 5 mana, 5/5, can't be killed. Super good, man. It's going to be a staple in these green beatdown strategies. Venerated Rot Priest is maybe the card I'm most excited for in green in this set. It's a 1 mana 1/2 with Toxic 1. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. This might finally bring back Infect in Modern and maybe even Legacy. The thing is about old Infect creatures is they want to be targets of spells, right? They want to be pumped up. They want to kill your opponent. But the issue is that like this is any spell, even your opponent's spell. So you play a creature, it gets targeted for removal and your opponent gets a poison counter. That's already really, really good. So like, this is going to be a 4 of in every toxic deck in Standard, and like is probably going to be played in Infect decks and poison decks in like Modern and Legacy if it comes back. I think Wrenn and 6 has kind of killed a lot of the poison counter decks. But because you play this card, you play your Glistener Elf, they go to kill their Glistener Elf, they still get a poison counter, and you can keep attacking with Venerated Rot Priest. Like, this card is sweet. Conduit of Worlds is 2 green mana, 2 generic mana, an artifact. You may play lands from your graveyard, and you can tap it to choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So Crucible of Worlds is played in, like, Vintage even, right? Playing lands from graveyards. Things like Wasteland and stuff like that. This is, while it's harder to cast because it requires colored mana, and 1 more mana, this is a way better Crucible of Worlds, right? In decks that want to play Crucible of Worlds anyway, or decks that play, like Wasteland or Strip Mine or whatever the format may be, you're going to play this card. So not only is it a better Crucible of Worlds, but being able to cast spells after you're burnt out from your graveyard is like amazing, especially in these Eternal formats, right? That you can just like leave up counter magic, like maybe like you're burnt out, like you cast Expressive Iteration with this card or something. I don't know, like, or even in Standard, being able to play this card, even if you don't use the cast lands from the graveyard, being able to cast your creatures from your graveyard after your burnout. I could see playing this card out of the board in these matchups that you expect to go very, very long. Cankerbloom is 2 mana, 1 generic, 1 green, Phyrexian Fungus, 3/2. You can pay 1 mana and sacrifice it to choose 1. Destroy target artifact. Number 2, destroy target enchantment. Or number 3, proliferate. Cards like these are just like solid in these green like aggressive decks, right? Like, a 2 mana 3/2 is already like fine, and then playing this out of the board to deal with artifacts or enchantments, or if it's bad, besides that, being able to proliferate. Like even if you're destroying the enchantment for 1 more mana than you like normally would, or maybe 2 more mana than you normally would from an otherwise sideboard card, being able to play it as a creature first is really great. I think this is going to exist in the sideboard of these standard green beatdown decks, or even these green mid-range decks, just as a enchantment or artifact hate that like can also proliferate. Evolving Adaptive is a 0/0 for 1 green Phyrexian Warrior, and is a battlefield with an oil counter on it. It gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. And whenever another creature enters a battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than Evolving Adaptive, put an oil counter on Evolving Adaptive. This reminds me of Experiment 1, right? Like, this is going to be another Experiment 1. You're going to play this as a 1/1, on your first turn, and then it's going to get really, really big in your green aggressive deck. Like, green aggressive decks obviously are being very, very pushed as we're going through the set review. Infectious Bite is 1 generic, 1 green mana, instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, and each opponent gets a poison counter. This is just like awesome in this like in a green toxic deck. You're gonna be playing this card as a removal spell to get your target toxic creatures through, and then also incidentally gives poison counters. I think the incidental poison counters are going to be like a real staple in these toxic decks in New Standard. Tyvar's stand is X and green instant. Target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. We have been playing a like 1 green give something hexproof and indestructible. Like we'd probably play that in a lot of decks, especially decks that we care about like one specific creature. But being able to dump more mana into that to make it even bigger is probably going to exist, right? I think in these green decks, if you're worried about like spot removal, like if you want to play that game, that's totally fine. Or if you're worried about things like board wipes, you could be playing this card. You probably wouldn't be playing the 1 mana indestructible to stop a board wipe. You'd rather just like play another creature. But a card like this that can also like be used to pump up, like we'll give up cards that we would like to use otherwise for cards that like we can use in multiple cases like any day. I think this card's definitely on the borderline compared to cards like that though. I did want to mention it. Venomous Brutalizer is 2 generic mana, 2 green mana, Phyrexian Knight 4/4 to Toxic 3. And when it enters the battlefield, you can pay 1 generic and 1 green. If you do, proliferate. I think this could exist in these standard toxic decks, especially if it's a green-based toxic deck. Being able to enter the battlefield, your opponent essentially, like in most cases, your opponent like automatically gets a poison counter, has Toxic 3, and you just got to clear the way now. That's awesome. Like if you're a toxic deck, this is a 4 mana 6/6, and you play those every day because each poison counter kind of counts as 2 damage. Viral Spawning is 2 generic mana, 1 green mana sorcery. Create a 3/3 green Phyrexian Beast creature token with Toxic 1. And it has Corrupted, that if your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, it has Flashback for the same amount of mana, 2 generic, 1 green. This is like really solid. Like again, in green toxic decks, like being able to get a 3/3 for 3 mana with Toxic 1 is like fine, like to start. But being able to get 2 of these with 1 card, I think one of the big issues that green aggressive decks have, or really green mid-range decks have, is they have a hard time like staying with the opponent's card quality and your opponent's card advantage if your initial strategy does not work, right? And having like cards that make multiple creatures or cards that make multiple threats is like what these green decks really, really need. So I think this card is definitely going to be played. Branchblight Stalker is a 2 mana 3/1, 1 generic, 1 green with Toxic 2. It's possible this is good enough, you know, a Toxic 2 creature for 2 mana. Like I could see old school Infect decks play a 2/2 with Infect for 2 mana. So I think this might be played. Carnivorous Canopy is 2 generic, 1 green. Sorcery, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. If that permanent's mana value is 3 or less, proliferate. This will be played out of the sideboard in a lot of green decks. It has a lot of diversity, being able to take out flyers, artifact, enchantment, and then if you're an Infect deck or really anything at all, being able to proliferate is great. Plague Nurse is 3 generic mana, 1 green mana, Phyrexian Cleric 3/4 with Toxic 2. You can pay 2 generic and 1 green. Have each other creature you control with Toxic gain Toxic 1 until end of turn. Active only once each turn. This might be played as a 4 mana card in the green toxic deck if you're doing a green stompy toxic situation. Or like green white where you like going really wide with the toxic mites, having them deal a little bit more. Like I could totally see this being played. Definitely not as like a multiple like you're probably not playing this as 4 of, it's probably a 2 or 3 of. But like a might-based toxic deck, green-white, like I could see this happening, right? You have 3 or 4 mites, you play Plague Nurse, jam in ones that don't, you activate this ability for ones that don't block. Like that's really strong. So those are the cards I think are going to make a appearance in constructed formats in green in Phyrexia LB1. If you want to see more videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. We are almost done our constructed set reviews. I'm excited for this set. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.